According to the Federal Reserve, baby boomers have officially become the richest generation to ever live. They're holding over 51% of the nation's total wealth. And right now, as emerging generations inherit a national debt set to grow by 63% in the next decade, a collapsing job market, record housing prices, and a cost of living crisis that's eating everything alive, you have to ask yourself, why did the richest generation in history sell out the nation's future? Here's what everyone gets wrong about boomers. It wasn't all of them. When you look at how that $85 trillion in generational wealth is actually distributed, nearly three-quarters of it sits with just the top 10%. The responsibility for what happened doesn't belong to everyone with gray hair. It belongs to a small, incredibly powerful cohort who had the chance to protect something and chose not to. Much of that concentration traces back to one thing, the GI Bill. For families who benefited, doors opened. For Black veterans, rural veterans, and those without access to the right networks, the promise never materialized. Of the 2.7 million Americans who served in Vietnam, roughly 80% were baby boomers from poor working-class families. They came home to a nation already facing economic stagnation. That's where the divide starts. The boomers who did benefit grew up in conditions that marked a historic rise from scarcity, comfort, attention, material abundance. The sheer size of the generation, combined with this economic leverage, shifted entire industries to curate the economy around their wants. At the same time, prevailing psychological thought told parents to treat children as equals, to frame challenging authority as healthy self-expression. Accommodation wasn't a privilege, it became a requirement. European observers at the time would simply call them spoiled. Cultural historian Lawrence Samuel noted that European camp counselors in the late 1950s were taken aback by American children. They described them as pseudo-mature, superficially self-assured, with respect granted only when authority had to be earned. Fun mattered above all else. Having things mattered. And that word, spoiled, appeared more frequently than any other descriptor. The uncomfortable part isn't that they were called spoiled, it's that many maintained those same self-serving attitudes as they rose into positions of power. Despite being defined by their countercultural revolution, early boomers ultimately embraced the very material comforts they protested against. One younger boomer interviewed openly acknowledged the hypocrisy. They marched and protested, and now they're stepping over homeless people to buy Rolexes. That abandonment of principle was reinforced by extraordinary economic opportunity. In 1966, employers were so desperate for workers they were recruiting from Appalachia and the Ozarks. Early boomers rapidly moved into high-paying corporate and financial roles. This marked the rise of the yuppie era, the expansion of Wall Street's influence, the prioritization of short-term profits, and the adoption of shareholder value as the dominant corporate objective. Under boomer leadership, corporate raiding became the prevailing business model. Companies were acquired and stripped for assets. Divisions deemed unprofitable were shuttered. Large-scale layoffs accelerated the deindustrialization of the United States. Production shifted overseas. Capital flowed into financial markets. Organized labor was simultaneously undermined. An anti-union consultant wrote in the Wall Street Journal that the current climate presented a unique opportunity to operate in a union-free environment. This was the critical moment, and they capitalized on it. The lack of future investment fell directly onto those born into the later half of the boomer cohort, Generation Jones. They entered adulthood in a fundamentally different economy. Job security never existed for them. They graduated into a labor market already framing entry-level work as obsolete. Wage stagnation collided with rising inflation and a deepening distrust in American institutions. The presidency wasn't defined by JFK, it was Watergate. Generation Jones watched early boomers abandon their countercultural ideals for material reward. They didn't see reform as attainable. They looked inward towards self-preservation and career survival, a mindset further shaped by the constant threat of nuclear war and the growing sense that the future was no longer guaranteed. Kids wrote letters to President Kennedy, "I don't like the plans you're planning. I'm too young to die." When the largest generation in history grows up believing there is no future, while those in power dismantle the institutions that once made long-term planning possible, short-term survival replaces long-term responsibility. And that sets the stage for political decisions detached from the financial well-being of future generations. It becomes easier to understand why American policy trapped the nation in endless remembrance rather than deliberate planning. Ronald Reagan promised to get the government off the backs of the American people. In practice, this meant dismantling the institutional guardrails that had protected workers throughout the post-war era. He slashed the top marginal tax rate from 70% to 28%, weakening the progressive tax structure that funded middle-class growth. In 1981, he fired 11,000 striking air traffic controllers. The message was clear: breaking unions was no longer a political risk, it was acceptable. Reagan deregulated finance, telecommunications, transportation, and energy. He laid the groundwork for corporate consolidation that would define 4 decades. Under the banner of free trade, Reagan and those who followed embraced a global economic model that rewarded companies for moving production overseas. The long-term costs shifted onto workers and future generations. Of 16.1 million jobs added during his presidency, 12.5 million were concentrated in low-wage sectors like retail and food service. Bill Clinton became the first boomer president in history. His administration signified the final nail in the coffin for America's manufacturing base. Of 22 million jobs created during Clinton's presidency, 40 to 45% were concentrated in low-skill, low-wage service work. Most high-wage gains came not from a stronger labor market, but from temporary speculation of the dot-com bubble. By 1998, the typical middle-income family worked 3,885 combined hours per year, 247 more hours than 1989. American workers put in more hours annually than workers in every advanced economy except Portugal. They captured just 3% of stock market gains while absorbing nearly 40% of the historic rise in consumer debt. Then came 2008, the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, a $700 billion bailout of the very institutions that caused it. Did baby boomers ride in the streets alongside Gen X and Millennials? No. They dismissed it as spoiled kids indulging in political theater. Because of this severe delay in wealth accumulation, Millennials now represent roughly 20% of the population while holding just $18 trillion in total wealth. Baby boomers also represent about 20% of the population, but control more than $85 trillion. Now Gen Z faces the same structural realities: a hollowed-out entry-level job market, historic housing prices, a declining dollar, a cost of living crisis, asset inflation. Has there been any effort to offer guidance or protection? No. They're just called lazy. I had a conversation with my dad recently. He's Generation Jones, right on the cusp of Gen X. He didn't experience the prosperity people push onto the boomer generation. He said something I can't stop thinking about. The older I get, the more I resent being part of the baby boomer generation. He said he vividly remembers watching the hippies sell out on what they were fighting for and gut the system. He called it hypocrisy. And he's not wrong. My dad said, if you just left me alone, I wouldn't be as frustrated. But you guys went through the exact same thing I'm going through. You asked questions, you tried to understand, you said something isn't right, and you got called lazy and entitled. Now I hear that same language directed at me. It's unbelievably frustrating because the system is still rigged, and the generation that had the power to fix it chose not to. What really happened was this: a small but powerful cohort protested and revolted. When it didn't go their way immediately, they decided nobody else would be able to have it either, and were still paying the price. Not just economically, but in terms of personal fulfillment. What I'd argue is the real reason we're here. Our economy is built for you to have slivers of opportunity to get filthy rich. It's about leverage, volatility, optimization, selling your soul. It's not built for family development or personal fulfillment or having a job so you can just live. None of that exists anymore. I read a comment on my channel recently. It broke me. All I want in life is to just have someone to hold hands with when I go grocery shopping. I don't even have any dreams. I just want a little bit of love. Everything is just so empty now. Every one of us can relate to that. We all just want a little bit of love. It's up to us now, Gen X as they rise into power, Millennials, and Gen Z especially, because we have the youth and that sense that things aren't working. We have to say, this can is not getting kicked down the road. We can't just think about our needs. We have to think about Gen Alpha and their kids and our grandkids. There has to be somebody who puts their foot down and says no more. We have to plant seeds for trees that will give shade to future generations. I've been going to the same gym since I was 18. I've gone there through my grandpa's death, the loss of close friends, my best days, my worst days, my accomplishments. Right when you walk in, there's a desk with chairs scattered everywhere. Nobody pushed them in. I always thought, this is the first impression. This is laziness. This is a lack of respect for your environment. So I started pushing them in every single time I walked in and out. I did this for years, quietly, without expecting anything to change. Recently, I walked in and the chairs were pristine. I walked out and they were still pristine. I didn't have to do it anymore. I don't know if the front desk recognized the pattern. I don't know if they saw someone continuously holding themselves to a standard and thought they should too. But something shifted. That's the power of small, consistent action. What if there were other individuals thinking the exact same thing? Yes, we're just talking about chairs. In the grand scheme, it doesn't make much difference, but it's a way to show up. You never know what someone was thinking when they walked in. They're frustrated. They look at scattered chairs. This place doesn't respect themselves. I don't respect myself. We can fall into that negative trap so quickly. What if you just plant a seed of kindness, a seed of accountability, a seed of respect? You can make a massive difference. I'm just one person, but if I'm able to help one person, just one person, and they're able to go on and help another person, or feel a little bit better about themselves, that's a ripple of hope that makes a difference. So do what you can do to make a change. Stop pointing fingers without understanding why. Learn from what frustrates you. Don't just dismiss people and move on. We have to start actively thinking, what can I do to start planting seeds for trees that will give shade to future generations? That's how we have to start thinking. I'm going to do everything I can to ensure that happens, because we all just want a little bit of love. Thank you for your time. If this video provided value, like and subscribe. We're in this together, and I'd really like to have you be part of this journey.